Are you buying a property with a planning problem? If you are, you have a decision to make. Do you go ahead with your purchase or do you back away? That's what I'm going to look at in this video. Two big concerns or two big categories of consideration for this particular decision. The first thing is the unauthorized development, the planning issue. How significant is it? It could be a minor breach of the planning laws, and it could be an unauthorized development that will be easy enough to get retention permission for, if that's what you choose further down the line. Any solicitor or any architect or engineer familiar with putting in applications to the local authority would be able to give you a fairly good steer as to whether it's likely to be easy enough to get retention permission or not. On the other hand, if it's a major issue, a major development, then it's possible that retention permission and application won't be successful. And if that's the case, then it's going to have serious consequences for your property further down the line if you ever choose to sell it. If you don't choose to sell it, if you're happy enough just to live in it and basically live in a development or live in a house with an unauthorized development and perhaps one that you're not going to get retention permission for, fair enough. But that brings me on to the second category of consideration, and that is whether you're a cash purchaser or whether you are borrowing from a lender. Because if you're borrowing from a lender, you're going to have a scenario where you are going to have a solicitor who's given an undertaking to the lender, to give or to get good marketable title. And that may not be possible or won't be possible, certainly, if there's a problem, an imperfection, an issue with the planning. So what's going to happen in that situation is your solicitor is going to have to write to the bank and say to the bank, look, there's a problem here with this property. There's an unauthorized development and I'm proposing to carry out or to qualify my undertaking to you. And so the solicitor is going to write to the bank and look to qualify the solicitor's undertaking and look to qualify the solicitor's certificate of title. That may or may not be acceptable to the lender. If it's acceptable and the lender says that's fine, go ahead, we accept that, then you have a decision to make whether you go ahead or not. The solicitor will probably be happy enough because the bank has given the go ahead and the lender obviously is happy enough and has given the go ahead. But that is something that is a decision. If you're borrowing, the decision to go ahead or not is going to be beyond your control to a great extent, because you will be relying on your solicitor and you'll be relying on the bank to be acceptable or to be accepting of the proposed qualification on title. And the proposed qualification on title, remember, comes from the difficulty with the planning. So, in summary, the two main concerns you have in relation to planning, if there's an issue with planning, are going to be one, to what extent or how serious is the breach of the planning laws? How significant is the unauthorized development? I mean, the unauthorized development could be, for example, something pretty small, pretty trivial, like perhaps a little store out the back or a garden shed or a conservatory or something which exceeds the exemption limits, for which our engineer or architect is suggesting to you you're going to have no difficulty getting retention permission for. On the other hand, if it's a much more significant development, well then there's always a risk that retention permission and application will not succeed. So that's going to leave you in a bit of a quandary. Do you go ahead or do you not go ahead? But the decision will be taken out of your hands to a large extent if you're not a cash buyer. Because if you're not a cash buyer, well then there's a borrower, a lender involved, and the lender is going to want good marketable title and is going to will have to be consulted in relation to the defect. And the defect with title is essentially the planning issue, the planning problem. And in that situation, your solicitor will have to write to the lender and say, look, I propose qualifying my undertaking. If the bank gives the go ahead, well and good, but you still have a decision to make, because remember, it's your property, it's your investment, and 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 15 years down the line, you may want to sell it, and this may come up again as a problem if you haven't secured retention permission to cover up or get over the unauthorised development at that stage. Hope you find this video useful. If you do, would appreciate if you give it a thumbs up down below. And if you are listening on Spotify or on iTunes to my podcast, the Irish Law and Small Business Podcast, then I'd appreciate if you left a review and followed on iTunes or Spotify. Thanks a lot.